Hey, Planeswalkers, hope you're doing well and staying safe. Welcome to today's episode of Friday Night Meta, my friends. I am absolutely jazzed. It is me, Mythras, your Meta Master, here to talk to you today about several things. So I appreciate you tuning in. Feel free to check out the timestamps down below where we're going to have a recap of last week at a high level. We'll drill into the data for you in both best of one and best of three. We'll talk about one of the key decks that you're going to have to take down today, and then we'll cover some key events that certainly impacted things and potentially where we're headed. So with that, Planeswalkers, I just want to say thank you as always. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel down over there. Additionally, like the video if you like it. Other great ways to support the channel down below in the details, my friends. So first off, we have a lot of movement here. And so as I've mentioned before, we're going to start with the snapshot of Bronze to Mythic. It's a little bit more spread than the way that we would approach the higher level game, but just like to show this as a collective totality because the trends are fairly much the same. But where we left off last week, that's very important, was right here. We have this massive rise in mono red, particularly in best of one. Additionally, it's there in best of three. So this is best of three. And then in best of one, we see the same thing. Massive domination. We talked about how we were going to beat that deck. And then obviously the weekend events of the Kaldheim League impacts, which we certainly see here today. So quick refresher on where we're at. You guys can check out last week's episode to get more details. But as we drill into best of one here, this is exactly what we're seeing now. So we're seeing mono white life gain really doing work on mono red aggro. So as we mentioned, that's a key deck along with the traditional mono white aggro, holding up better against the mono red snow aggro decks. And that's exactly what we're beginning to see. We see this drop off very heavily in terms of played. So we lose about 5% there, which is a lot in terms of the meta, and we can continue to see that drop rather quickly here in best of one, and then we see the rise of mono white life gain as well. And what's interesting, folks, is if we look at these win rates here down below, let's pause here for a second. If we look at those win rates down below, it's actually been fairly steady. It has been holding around 60%. And when we look at mono red aggro, the difference here is actually what's interesting is less decks are being played, but the win rate's starting to creep back up. So some interesting evolution here in best of one that we want to keep an eye on, but we are beginning to see other decks popping up more and dominating and becoming a more prevalent piece of the meta. These are Naya Adventures, and the other one that I know you guys talked to me about last time is Boros Cycling. Again, still fairly defined in the meta. So we'll keep an eye on those in terms of best of one. So key callouts here again, win rates we have from first to fifth: mono white life gain, mono white aggro, mono red snow, dimmer rogues, and Boros Cycling. All these run at a 55% plus win rate. Popularity, again, we are seeing that rise in mono white life gain. Not enough to overtake mono red snow right now, but again, going from the top down, first we got mono red snow aggro, mono white life gain, mono white aggro, Sultai control, which I always find interesting, and then dimmer rogues. And this makes sense. I will call this out here because it is a nice counter to some of these aggro based decks. So we'll see this, I believe, continue to rise over time, as it's kind of one of the preferred decks in terms of those long game control matches in best of one. So that is what the snapshot looks like today in best of one. We're going to hop over to best of three now, my friends, because I'm sure all of you are wondering about that as well. In best of three here, we do have some very interesting movements, and we'll get into this. Similar before, mono red aggro domination, we came out of the weekend's events, and it has certainly made a massive impact here on the meta, which we'll talk about in a second. You'll begin to see this evolve in the snapshots, but the win rates here, we have Boros Cycling at the top with almost a 62%, followed by Temur Obosh Adventures, Adventures deck, also aka known as Teamer Draws. So very, very nice. Mono red snow aggro, still high win rates, but it's not as good as it was. Gruul Adventure, then mono white aggro, and then additionally in that top 10 spot, we do begin to see Naya Adventures, Sultai Ultimatum still in there, and Dimir Rogues a piece of that meta. Now, when we look at popularity though, we have Sultai Ultimatum taking up almost 15% of the meta in terms of best of 3. So that is not, mono red has totally been dethroned here. So this is a huge thing to pay attention to. We see a huge jump in Teamer Obosh Adventures in the 2 slot, Naya Adventures as well in the 3. And this makes a lot of sense coming out of the weekend's events. Mono red snow aggro has significantly fallen there to 10%. It's percentage played in the meta has almost been cut in half. And then we have Boros Cycling really starting to move up here as well. And again, makes sense given what we're seeing, and a lot of fun pieces there that we'll talk about continued in a second. So when we begin to look at this meta, very important to understand, we see Sultai Ultimatum, like I said, making that big move up, the huge drop in mono red snow aggro. But again, folks, look, the win rate is starting to rise again. So we begin to see these trade-offs that are happening that we want to follow closely. We see the Teamer Obosh Adventure, Teamer Turns deck becoming more prominent in the meta, and then similar to Naya Adventures. Now, what's interesting though is we actually see a win rate drop on the adventure side for Obosh, and then a continued continuity here at Naya Adventures. So we're really just seeing these shifts around, and some of the win rates staying stagnant, which almost begins to tell me that, you know, mono red aggro is still a good solution in the meta, even though it was cut in half. So if you enjoy playing that deck, folks, don't give up hope or faith there on that one. But here's a big winner. The big winner here is actually Boros Cycling. So we see it increase like almost 5% in the meta. We also see the increase in the win rates by roughly 5%, which is really big. So keep an eye on this one, my friends. This is a budget deck. This is the perfect deck for new players, which is great to see it as a portion of the meta. I think it is truly underrepresented. I know you guys called that out a little bit last week as well, so I wanted to touch on it a little bit more here. So again, lots of things happening. We see a huge impact coming on last weekend's events, which we'll talk about here in a second as well. So we talked about the best of 1, we talked about the best of 3. Now what I want to do is equip you for the top deck being played today, particularly in best of 3 today. We talked about the best of 1 last week. And this also pulls over into the best of 1. So as we begin to see Sultai Ultimatum move up as well, and we're going to talk about it here, the counter to this deck also runs nicely in terms of our best of 1. So here we see the matchups. We're going to go ahead and check out the win rate. We see where it plays well, but here was the kicker, and here's what I wanted to talk about. So we know mono red snow aggro is already a decent counter to Sultai Ultimatum, but I want to drill into Boros Cycling here today because we do see it coming up as a nice clip in the meta. So again, for those of you that aren't familiar with this deck or are, this is the best one that you can run against Ultimatum, as long as they aren't playing. And so here's the key: as long as they aren't playing a ton of stuff in terms of the graveyard removal, we do see some. You have a lot of ability to play around and get through. So we'll have to keep that in mind as this deck evolves. It's a very healthy win rate matchup right now. So just keep an eye on that as boards position, as things might try and play around the cycling decks. The other key about cycling is it is explosive enough to take these decks down, and people forget about that rather quickly. So don't forget, because that's a key piece around this deck and gives you a good opportunity to take down some of these other control decks that you can play around. Here's what we got in terms of the cycling deck, running again at a 65%. Let's go ahead and look at this one here a little bit more in detail. Again, my friends, there is really only a few ads. This particular version runs to Fury Master of Time. We also aren't seeing Lurrus in this version. You can run the Lurrus version. We see the Improbable Alliance deck card here that helps you as well against the early game, also increases your viability late game as well. And so keep those things in mind. Now, I'll put the list down below for you. I've ran some nice versions of this, and a latest one coming out last week that I think you guys can certainly pick up and play and be successful on. So we've talked about the best of one, the best of three. We've talked about the key rise in the Sultai Ultimatum. Now let's go see why this is happening so we can help stay ahead. Quickly here, call out to Doggart, Q Bones here. Nice job on your write-up on Arena, MTG Arena Zone here. I just want to call it out. I know you do a nice breakdown of these things. And just wanted to piggyback on some of the data here from MTG Data. This is a breakdown coming out of the MPL and Rivals League weekend. This is why we saw a lot of these key movements in the deck. The other thing that I do want to call out, there's certainly a reset here in March that's obviously going to play an impact. That happens a lot of times when stuff gets refreshed, as things kind of fall into place, as people try and move quickly into Mythic, we see a little bit of adjustment in the decks as well. So really here, we have a finally a positive win rate for Sultai Ultimatum. We haven't seen this in other tournaments. I think it's a big reason of why we've seen this in particular in the meta. It is also weak to Adventure, so keep that in mind. It doesn't do as well against Gruul. We see the Naya deck starting to pop up between the mid-range and the Fury deck. Those are some nice shells. Again, going to continue to watch those impacts. But additionally, that cycling deck is in here that we want to pay attention to. And then overall, mono red aggro just had a really poor showing. Mono white aggro did not do as well. So this is why we begin to see those decks held into check and moving into those positions as well, my friends. So great events. I ran Eli Cassis's adventure deck for Naya. You guys can check that one out as well to give you an idea. The other one call out that I do want to say here is a shout out to, in terms of best of one, Covert Go Blue, because I know you hit #1. Congrats, tough to do in best of one. And I will also say in particular, I know his work on mono white has certainly also led to an influx of the mono white players. And given, I know we discussed these things in terms of counter, we covered it last week, a good segue into that piece. So folks, where do we go from here? There is a plethora of tournaments out there right now. Let's go back to our meta snapshot. A plethora of tournaments out there right now. We'll continue to see these impacts. We'll continue to see changes as things adjust. There was a huge spread there. We certainly will start to see things tighten, as we should. A lot of it's play style, a lot of it's where we're at in the season, and we'll continue to see those things. As well as best of one, particularly we'll find and probably see those rises of those hard counters like we did with mono red, and find the reciprocal with the mono white. Sultai control will probably, or some other sort of space for a control deck, certainly the ability to be there, as I mentioned before. So Planeswalkers, final thing here that I forgot to mention, if you do have questions, if you have comments, let me know down below. I'm always happy to answer. I'm happy to chat with you about that. Feel free to hop in the Discord server, my friends. Again, we've talked about a lot today. We did a recap. We talked about best of one. We talked about best of three. We told you how to take on the Sultai Ultimatum deck this week with a hard counter with Boros Cycling and some of those other things like the adventure decks to give you good options there in terms of the meta. And then we also covered some of those impacts from Kaldheim and showcased a nice little spreadsheet there on why those impacts and why those things happened. We got a lot of time left in the season. We'll see things continue to evolve, my friends. Lastly, as always, just a huge thank you. Truly, I appreciate your support. support, feel free to subscribe down over there. Additionally, like the video, my friends. If you like it, you can like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Twitch to stay up to date on content like this. And feel free. Always appreciate the above and beyond additional support that you guys give. Ways to do that in the details, my friends. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Friday Night Meta. May your Friday night magic be blessed and you have some fun. Stay safe, my friends. Mythras out. Until next time, we got a lot of great things coming your way.